بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى عن النفخ في الشراب فقال رجل القذاة أراها في الإناء فقال أهرقها قال إني لا أروى من نفس واحد قال فأبن القدح إذن عن فيك رواه الترمذي رحمه الله تعالى وقال حديث حسن صحيح. In our last session, we had the honor and the opportunity to learn a new etiquette of drinking that we find from the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that etiquette is mentioned here by Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi as a chapter, Babu Karahatin Nafkhi fi Sharab, that it is makruh to blow into the drink that you are going to drink or the utensil in which the drink is placed. The same masla is for breathing, and we already prayed that, and I went through that last week also. That when it comes to breathing into the drink that an individual is drinking, it is makruh. And here Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi is mentioning that when it comes to blowing into a drink, for example, sometimes it's hot, the same masla applies, it will be makruh. And there are many reasons why it could be makruh. But when it comes to the karahiyat and it being disliked in the sharia, last week we learned that it is makruh tanzihi. Meaning it's not makruh tahrimi or haram, but it's makruh tanzihi. Meaning a person should avoid blowing into it, but if someone does it, he will not be committing an act of disobedience, or he will not be sinning, and he will not receive any sin for this. Now the first hadith Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi brings over here is narrated on the authority of Abu Sa'id Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He mentions that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam prohibited us, stopped us from blowing into the drink that we would be drinking. He prohibited us, naha anin nafkhi fi sharab, prohibited us, stopped us from blowing into the drink. Now before we move on with the hadith, one thing I would like to mention over here is that one thing I've mentioned many times, and I would like to repeat myself again once over here, that many individuals, they have this habit of looking at the translation of the ahadith and then concluding, or looking at translations of ahadith and then trying to figure out what they mean. And many a times because of this, an individual goes astray. And let me explain. In this hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find the hadith mentions, Abu Sa'id Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the Sahabi and the companion mentions, Anna Nabiya sallallahu alayhi wasallam naha anin nafthi fi sharab, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he prohibited us. Now naha comes in many ahadith. Sometimes when the word naha comes, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam stopped us from carrying out an action, sometimes it comes to show that this action is haram. Sometimes when naha is used in the hadith, it comes to show that this act is makruh tahrimi. Sometimes when naha is used in the hadith, it comes to show that that act is makruh tanzihi. And because an individual, he is unaware of what this means, naha, sometimes what happens is, or any other hadith, sometimes what happens is when he picks up the translation of the hadith itself, because he does not have full knowledge of the Quran and the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the entire collection of hadith is not in front of him. The entire Quran and all the verses and the ulum of the Quran are not in front of him. When he reads just the translation, many questions arise in his mind. Many objections arise in his mind. And na'udhu billah, many a times it happens that because these objections come about and he doesn't refer himself to a reliable and authentic alim, what happens is this individual, these objections, they build, And what happens? Unfortunately, na'udhu billah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save each and every one of us, but that point comes where he leaves the fold of Islam. Why? Because he tried to conclude from the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not knowing all the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and just by looking at the translation and not knowing what the hadith or the verses of the Quran mean. This is why, once again, I would like to stress the importance on whenever we want to read the translation of the verses of the Quran or the translation of the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we should read the translation with its explanation. And that explanation should be written by a reliable alim who has authentic ilm of the Quran and ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Over here, in the same manner, we can take this hadith as an example. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam uses the word naha, or when the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, sometimes to show an amal, when they use the word naha, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited us, it doesn't always mean it's haram. It doesn't always mean it's makruh tahrimi. In this scenario, it means it's makruh tanzihi. Now, someone who just reads the translation that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited us, now he may think that it's haram, it's makruh tahrimi. Now what does he do? He sees someone blowing into a drink, he starts arguing with him. He starts quarreling with him. Now why are you doing this? It comes in the hadith, you're not supposed to do it. Not knowing it's makruh tanzihi. Yeah, if someone is doing it, you're not allowed to do nakir on that. Yes, what you're supposed to do is teach the individual. Like how a father teaches his child. Like how an ustad and a teacher teaches his student. Like a shaykh teaches his murid. This is how these ahadith are taken. That's makruh tanzihi. A person is taught that he should not be doing this. But if someone does do it, then he's not sinning and he should not be put down for that. Nor if a person does that, should he be taken as someone who is doing something khilaf sharia or looked down upon now for doing that action. Why? Why does this happen? Because an individual not knowing and not having the entire collection of ahadith in front of him looks at the translation and now he concludes himself. Whereas there's a big difference when it comes to all three types. One is haram, one is makruh tahrimi, one is makruh tanzihi. There's a big difference. When something is haram, makruh tahrimi, there's a difference in that too. If something is haram and a person denies that no, it's not haram, it's halal, that person becomes a kafir, he leaves the fold of Islam. And something is makruh tahrimi and he denies its prohibition, he won't leave the fold of Islam. He won't leave the fold of Islam. So difference between haram and makruh tahrimi. Also difference between makruh tahrimi and makruh tanzihi. A person carries out an action which is makruh tahrimi, he will be sinful, he will receive sin. And a person carries out an action which is makruh tanzihi, he will not be sinful. He will be doing something which is not good, which is disliked, but he won't be sinful. He won't be receiving any sin. So look at the difference. When a person doesn't have the full knowledge and he just reads the translation, then he can conclude many a times wrong. He can have many objections on the Quran and ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which he would not have had if he understood these ahadith from the correct sources with its correct explanation. So khair, in this hadith also Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's teaching is, we learn from the hadith of Abu Sa'id Khudri radiallahu ta'ala an, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam naha anin nafkhi fi sharab, he prohibited us from blowing into the drink. So a person that was seated in the gathering of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hadith mentions فَقَالَ رَجُلٌ الْقَضَاةُ أَرَاهَا فِي الْإِنَاءِ, that the person asked a mas'ala, that what do I do with that litter or with that grass that is in the utensil? So what used to happen back in the days is they would fill water in utensils and it would be kept there. So qadat refers to that litter or that thing which falls into the utensil by itself. So sometimes the utensil is there, there's a tree, sometimes something drops from the tree into the utensil, or due to the air, something falls into that utensil. So this Sahabi, this individual asked, that what do I do with that litter, with that grass, or with that thing, that dust that falls into the utensil? How would I drink it? Because the normal scenario would be, I would blow it to the side and then drink. So he asked, Al-qadatu araha fil ina. What do I do with that? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he replied, فَقَالَ أَهْرِقْهَا, pour it. Meaning, don't blow into that drink. Rather, that part, that water, that mashroob, whatever that drink is, pour it out a bit so that you get rid of that litter which is in the utensil. Obviously, this hukam and this command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in that scenario where there's no shortage of water. When there's more water, so if you pour it, then you can take more. If there's a shortage of water, then obviously you can use a spoon or something else to get rid of that litter which is in the utensil. Or even if there's no shortage of water, if you have another means, for example a spoon, then you can use it. Yes, where you have no other option and there's also no shortage of water, then ahriqha, you can pour that water out and then refill that utensil. Now that sahabi and that companion, that individual, he asked another mas'ala. What did he ask? قال إني لا أروى من نفس واحد. He asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when I drink water, then my thirst is not quenched in one gulp. If I drink, then I don't feel full and my thirst doesn't go away after just drinking it in one go. لا أروى من نفس واحد. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what does he say? Many a times this is something psychological. What happens? You're very thirsty, because you're tired, whatever the reason is, it's very hot outside, you become very thirsty. Now what happens? If you drink the entire cup in one go, then psychologically, you don't feel that you have quenched your thirst. Why? Because you drank it all in one go. And sometimes that same water, you're very thirsty, that same glass, that same bottle, you drink it in 3 different sips. Now you feel like you've quenched your thirst. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, keeping that aspect in mind, said to that individual, فَأَبِنِ الْقَدَحَ إِذًا عَنْ فِيكَ. Then if this is the case and your thirst is not being quenched in one gulp, in one sip, then what should you do? Then remove the cup and move the cup away from your mouth. Now what does that mean? We learned before, many sessions ago, we prayed the masnoon way of drinking water is that a person drinks and then moves it away. A person has a cup, then he should drink, move the cup away. So فَأَبِنِ الْقَدَحَ إِذًا عَنْ فِيكَ. So what is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying? That when you drink, then move it away from your mouth. So what will that do? You'll drink it in more than one sip. So drink it in 2 or 3 sips, which is the masnoon method. Inshallah, this will be a means of your thirst being quenched. This is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned in this hadith. The final hadith that Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi mentions in this bab is وعن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى أن يتنفس في الإناء أو ينفخ فيه. رواه الترمذي رحمه الله تعالى وقال حديث حسن صحيح. Is narrated on the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas رضي الله تعالى عنهما that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited us, once again makruh tanzihi, stopped us from breathing into the drinking vessel or utensil, أو ينفخ فيه, or that a person blows into it, or it's blown into that vessel. When a person is drinking, then he blows into that vessel. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stopped us from doing these 2 actions. So breathing into it, like we learned before, the masnoon tariqa is that the masnoon way is that when an individual is drinking, then after he finishes, he should move it away. He shouldn't blow in or breathe into the vessel or the utensil or the cup. He should move it away. So this is what this hadith is mentioning, that number 1, you shouldn't breathe into it, and number 2, if it's hot or for some other reason there's some litter in it, then you shouldn't blow into it. Rather, you should pour that part of the water away so that you get rid of the litter or that thing which is in the cup or the utensil. And this is the final hadith Imam Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi mentions in regards to this etiquette. There are all these ahadith and all these etiquettes that we learn. These are things that we should bring into our life. Not just ourselves, we should keep them in mind at all times. We should practice upon them. And even at home, our wives, our children, our brothers, our sisters, our parents, with hikmat, with wisdom, we should explain and teach them these ahadith, these etiquettes of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, keeping in mind that number 1, if we teach them and they practice, then number 1, they will also get thawab, and for us teaching them, we will also get thawab. And number 2, they are also, of course, making their akhirah, which is obviously a means of happiness for ourselves, looking at our wives, looking at our children, looking at our parents, those that are close to us, our friends, those that have ta'alluq with us. When we see that they are coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this should encourage us and become a means of happiness for ourselves. Also, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq and the divine ability to keep these ahadith, these etiquettes in mind. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the ability to practice upon them, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also give us all the ability and the divine ability and the tawfiq to teach these ahadith and these etiquettes to others. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahumma wa sallim ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Maulānā Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.